Every year you work harder. Every year your paycheck gets bigger, at least on paper. And every year, somehow life feels more expensive. Groceries cost more. Rent creeps upward. Savings feel weaker. The future feels farther away. But here's the question no one asks out loud. If inflation is normal, necessary, and under control, why does it quietly drain your life anyway? Because inflation isn't just an economic condition. It's a financial illusion, one that functions like a tax you never voted for, never approved, and never see itemized on your paycheck. And the most unsettling part? It's not a flaw in the system. It's one of its most reliable features. To understand how inflation became a silent tax, we need to trace how money itself changed, slowly, logically, and invisibly, until price increases became a substitute for political honesty. Stay with me, because the truth about inflation isn't taught in school, debated in elections, or explained on the news. It's hidden in plain sight. Setting the stage when taxes had faces for most of history, taxation was obvious. Kings demanded gold. Empires seized crops. Governments raised levies openly. And when taxes became unbearable, people revolted. The French Revolution, the American Revolution, countless uprisings across history. Taxation had a limit, not because rulers were kind, but because people could see the cost. Raising taxes required political justification, public consent, or brute force inflation changed that equation completely, because inflation doesn't feel like a tax. It feels like the economy. Origins, the first illusion of price changes inflation, isn't modern. Its roots stretch back thousands of years. Ancient Rome faced a familiar problem. Military expansion, expensive bureaucracy, declining tax tolerance, the solution? Debase the currency? Silver coins slowly contained less silver. The face value stayed the same. Prices quietly rose. The public blamed merchants. Its merchants blamed shortages. The state avoided rebellion. This was the first lesson in inflation. If you can reduce the value of money instead of raising taxes, you can extract wealth without confrontation. The illusion worked until it didn't. Rome collapsed under economic decay, social instability, and loss of trust. But the idea survived. The rise from metal to paper to belief. Fast forward to early modern Europe. Gold and silver constrained governments. Wars required funding. Debt became permanent. Banks offered a breakthrough. Paper claims instead of metal, credit instead of taxation. Future promises instead of present sacrifice. This marked the next phase of the illusion. Money no longer needed intrinsic value. It only needed confidence. Central banks emerged to stabilize currencies, manage debt, and smooth crises. But stability came with a hidden trade-off: the power to expand money supply without immediate accountability. Inflation shifted from an accident to a tool. Key twist: inflation becomes policy. By the 20th century, something radical happened. Governments stopped fearing inflation. They embraced it. Economists reframed inflation as healthy, necessary, a sign of growth. Deflation became the enemy. Stable prices became suspicious. 2% inflation became the goal. Why? Because mild inflation reduces the real value of debt, encourages spending, oversaving makes deficits politically survivable. Inflation transformed into policy camouflage. Taxes were unpopular. Inflation was invisible. The breaking point, when money lost its anchor. The illusion reached its peak in 1971. When the U.S. abandoned the gold standard, money lost its last physical restraint. From that moment, currency was backed by trust alone. Governments could spend without immediate limits. Central banks could create money at scale. Inflation was no longer a risk. It was a lever. And once pulled, it became hard to stop. Cause and effect: how inflation becomes a tax. Here's the mechanism most people never see. Inflation does three critical things. First, it reduces purchasing power silently. You still have the same number of dollars, they just buy less. No vote required. Second, it transfers wealth. Savers lose, wage earners lag, asset holders gain. This isn't accidental. Inflation rewards those closest to money creation, governments, banks, and large institutions, before prices adjust. This is known as the Cantillon effect. Third, it hides responsibility. Rising prices can always be blamed on Supply chains, corporations, consumers' external shocks, rarely on money creation itself. Inflation doesn't knock on your door, slowly rearranges your life. The fallout, a population that can't save over decades. Inflation reshapes behavior. Saving becomes irrational. Debt becomes normal. Speculation becomes survival. People are forced into risk. Stocks, real estate, leverage, not to grow rich, but to avoid falling behind. The system subtly pushes everyone onto the same treadmill. Run faster or lose ground. Failed fixes, why the solutions don't work. When inflation becomes visible, officials respond. Interest rates are raised. Spending is promised to slow. Austerity is discussed. But these fixes rarely last. Why? Because inflation isn't just an economic issue. It's a political dependency. Governments rely on inflation too. Reduce real debt burdens, fund promises without raising taxes. Avoid public backlash. Stopping inflation would require spending cuts, higher taxes, political courage so inflation pauses, then returns. Modern parallels, the silent tax today. Look at recent history. Trillions created during crises. Asset prices surge. Living costs explode. Official inflation numbers often lag reality. Housing understated, healthcare minimized, education excluded. Asset inflation ignored, yet households feel it daily. The illusion remains intact because the tax isn't labeled, the deduction isn't itemized. The mechanism is abstract. Inflation is the only tax where the rate isn't voted on, the burden isn't equal. And the blame is always external, the repeating pattern. Every major currency collapse followed the same arc. Debt expansion, monetary flexibility, inflation, normalization, public denial, crisis reset, not once, not twice. Over and over. The names change. The logic doesn't. The deeper illusion, the greatest trick inflation ever pulled, wasn't stealing money. It was convincing people that prices rising is normal, that saving is foolish, that dependence is stability. Inflation doesn't feel like oppression. It feels like modern life. 3 clear takeaways. 1. Inflation is a policy choice, not a natural law. It reflects decisions about money creation, not fate. 2. Inflation taxes the least protected first. Those without assets, leverage, or political power pay the highest price. 3. The illusion works because it's slow. No single moment feels catastrophic until the damage is already done. Final warning, an open question. Every system eventually faces a choice. Transparency and discipline, or illusion and expansion. History shows which one is usually chosen. The question isn't whether inflation will continue. The question is how much trust remains before the illusion stops working. Call to action: if this video changed how you see rising prices, share it. Subscribe for deeper, honest breakdowns of money, power, and systems. And comment below. If inflation is a tax, why are we never asked to approve it? Because once you recognize the illusion, it stops being invisible.